So, hello, welcome back to the latest podcast. I'm delighted to have my old friend Tony Drayton here with me. Hello, Tony.
Hello, Gerard.
And thank you, incidentally. Thank you very much for coming. Just by way of introduction, I would say that you are best known, perhaps, for a lot of people for being a sort of fanzine producer in the punk rock years, in general, punk rock commentator, I guess. But there's a lot more I want to go into as well. I want to talk about your days as a magician and as a traveller, as a TV extra, and what I'm hoping we can kind of unravel here, and only time will tell. But what I'm hoping we can unravel is a kind of a thread that connects all these things that may or may not be called spirit that you
Mhm.
talked about in one of your later fanzines. So I'll kind of dip in with stuff about that along the way, I guess. But I always start these things by saying, could you sort of tell us a little bit about how you grew up and how you think that might have kind of pushed you in the direction that you ended up in? So over to you.
Right. I was actually born in London, which surprises a lot of people because I had a Glasgow accent or Scottish accent, Glasgow accent, which we'll come to in due course. But yes, I was born in London. Then we moved out of London. I was born in 1958. Then we moved out shortly after, about 2 years later, I think. I don't remember much of this life. I was told this is what happened. I have to take my parents' word for it. Um, Moved up. I remember my first memories were being in Clacton, which was about 64, about 5, 6 years old. And I remember hearing the Beatles. She Loves You, Yeah, Yeah, Yeah. That's one of my main memories of my youth, of my very young childhood. And I remember yeah, 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 and we in French, because yes was we in French. I think it's hilarious. They were saying she loves you to
Yes.
we. This is my life. Unfortunately, I've not progressed since that day. I think that's the peak of my life. Um, so I remember the Beatles, and I also remember the Mods and Rockers down on the Clacton seafront. This my dad had got a job in Butlins, which is why I think we've gone to Clacton because he'd got a job working in Butlins, which meant we went to the seafront a lot. We were down, and my older brother, 2 years older than me, used to take me down there. I remember seeing all the scooters, the mod scooters down the seafront. Another big memory for me is seeing all the mod scooters and the rockers. Actually, I like the mod scooters and the rockers look. I didn't like the way the mods looked. I didn't understand it, just like suits. But I liked the leather jackets and all that stuff, and long greasy hair. I thought it looked fantastic. But then I also liked the mod bikes, all the shiny bikes. Um, and we used to play mods at school. We used to play mods and rockers. We'd have fights. You'd be a mod or a rocker, and I was always a rocker.
A modern take on playing war, I suppose.
It was, yeah, and this is also very all not just me, but every all the kids in Clacton picked up on this mods and rockers thing, and this is what we thought. Yeah, rather than Nazis and British whatever war games, it was mods and rockers. Um, and that was fantastic years. It was great for me those years. And then we moved to Scotland to another Butlins. My dad got promoted to a Butlins in Ayrshire in south of Scotland, and so we all relocated up to there. And that would have been about 1966, 1967. And that was an interesting time because it was a very small, Butlins was out in the wilds, and we went to this school, this little local village school, which is attached to this coastal town, but a village, a port, which is mainly fishing and farming was the main sort of occupations around it. All the parents, apart from my parent, who was working in Butlins. And so huge cultural dislocation, cultural psychic shock, if you like, to suddenly going from mods and rockers and the Beatles and like it wasn't just behind the Beatles. There's a music all around us down in Clacton with the mods and rockers and the fact that I knew the Beatles. There was a lot of music all around, and suddenly we're up in the wasteland, the
Yeah.
wasteland of this place, and there was nothing. They didn't know the Beatles. Yeah, gone to a place that didn't exist. All this is it'd gone back not just in geographically, but in time wise. We sort of jumped back to like the 40s. the
Wow.
way people behaved. So, and I missed London. Yeah, I missed London. I think I saw Clacton as London, and I missed that for almost from day one.
Mm, mm.
And there was good things there. Very nature. I got very much into the nature there because there was nothing. The school was back and beyond, and used to go for walks in the mountains, fields. It was a for that side of it, it was tremendous. But for culturally, for what I was into, which was this music, it was a disaster. And I think we didn't have a record player, so suddenly I was cut off from all music now for years. And that was obviously 67, 68, when people talk about the psychedelic music and all this stuff, completely passed me by because of where I was. And so say not just geographically, but the way people acted, behaved there. It was like forces like Scottish country dancing. We used to do Scottish country dancing.
Rock and roll.
That was our rock and roll. That was it. And that was big. I've heard that Scottish country dancing was quite big around the country at the time. People used to do country dancing classes at school, but this was it. This was really important. And Stampede, that's an area that we moved out of there. I'm trying to think what I think we moved from there to Polmont, near Falkirk. And now the timing, I'm not sure what the timing would be now. Maybe 70. That's then actually my dad left the Butlins job, got another job. And so we worked, the house we're staying in was a Butlins part of the complex. So when he left the job, we had to leave the house. And in a Falkirk, it would be at least 68, so a couple of years there. Because in Falkirk, I started just going to football, but Dad took me to a football match. I saw Falkirk play Clyde, I think it was 1968, and suddenly that was like hearing the Beatles for the first, like hearing "She Loves You," yeah, yeah, yeah. It's as good as that.
Not sure
Um,
Falkirk and the Beatles have been compared too often.
it's not enough, Gerard, not enough. But I think football and music, I think it's you take it more generally. It was like a real spark. I think, wow, this is fantastic. And started going to seeing football. I wasn't really into music at all at that point. Again, the 60, 69. I think this is going to become important because when I do get into music, it's like back into it. Another big spark, and that was David Bowie's "Aladdin Sane" in '73. I'm trying to think what happened. I'm trying to think how I got back into it. From suddenly following Falkirk, used to go to all the away matches and things. I remember getting a bus. Used to have the football special trains. And I remember going to Aberdeen on an evening match in Aberdeen. This is commitment. Evening match in Aberdeen. We got this train, took about 6 hours to get there. I think 6 hours back. Got back about 3 o'clock in the morning, and we lost 7-0. And that's commitment. And I think I went to just about every ground in Scotland, but apart from Arbroath. I mean, it really reminds us, it's a bit of a side shoot, but I never went to Arbroath. I think it's so hard to get to Arbroath. It's regrets in my life. I never went to Arbroath.
Could call your autobiography that.
That's it. Yeah, the lost place.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I got to the football, and I was in Falkirk, Polmont. Polmont is near Falkirk. It's actually famous on a Las Vegas album. By the time I get to Polmont, there's a song which you can look up later. You can play later. It's actually based on a borstal, supposedly. There's a borstal in Polmont, which became famous for a kind of rough place. But so I think the Las Vegas song is refers to that, not me being there. And then we went from there, from Falkirk or Polmont to Cumbernauld, Newtown. And why, I don't know, but we did. We went there, and it was there. And Cumbernauld, I don't know, Cumbernauld is one of the new towns they built, based on Corbusier's theories and plans. So it's all kind of separated. Where people live and the roads are meant to be separate. There's like big ring roads, big roads running through it, but lots of small villages, if you like, small suburbs with lots of underpasses, which became very Clockwork Orangey, very, very violent.
Mm.
Obviously, didn't really understand that people were. And also didn't help. They built this whole thing, this whole big modern structure in the middle of Scotland, outside Glasgow. And then they moved people from the Gorbals. They decided, oh, we're going to tear down the Gorbals and relocate all these people into this new town. People who weren't really ready for the 20th century. So you had all these violent thugs from the Gorbals put into this new town structure with a lot of underpasses, and it was a recipe for disaster.
Is that a culture shock for you with all these people coming in?
Yeah, I mean, the culture shock from each one's a culture shock. Going to Ayr was a huge culture shock. From Ayr to Falkirk was, again, coming out of the countryside of Scotland into populated Scotland, and shops and things. Scottish. So that was a huge culture shock. And then going to Cumbernauld, we had this whole new town kind of vibe. Gets kind of shocked. You don't realise how shocking it is because you don't know any different. As you're a child, whatever age I was then, like 20 now, 78. So since 12, I suppose about 12, we went to Cumbernauld. It's just weird. It's a weird place, but you didn't realise nothing out. Other places were normal places, and this was just a weird plan, a weird experiment.
Yeah. There's quite a lot of them around the country, wasn't there? I know Liverpool had a lot of that going on, moving
Oh,
people.
did it? Yeah. So
Yeah.
there's like the Welwyn Garden City and places like that, they were built, and there's a few places on the north of London that were built specifically. I'm trying to think of one off the M1, off the M11. But yeah, there was a few things. I didn't realize there was some in Liverpool, but I noticed this Glasgow one is still quite famous. You look Cumbernauld up.
Right.
Famous as one of the most ugliest places in Britain, worst towns in Britain. It keeps up on those lists. I think they filmed Gregory's Girl there.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
So because part of it, because it looks so weird. So science fiction. It's like living in a science fiction kind of place. If you realise that not everything was like that. But it was there that I got into music, and I got back into music. 71, 72. I started hearing Radio 1. For some reason, I started hearing Radio 1. And then that was huge. I'm talking about Top of the Pops. So listening to Top of the Pops started there. This is both my music. If Falkirk, I see it as my football addict. And then suddenly Cumbernauld music became my life. Really, just threw myself into it. And that Top of the Pops is really important. And this is the time of glam rock. We had obviously Gary Glitter. Remember Gary Glitter on Top of the Pops? Huge. Rock and Roll Part 2. Do You Want to Touch? I mean, Do You Want to Touch is phenomenal. Yeah. It's probably the best song I'd ever heard. Another Beatles moment was that one. It's just so grunting, so animalistic, that song.
It's funny, isn't it, with Gary Glitter, because obviously it's all overshadowed these days by what's happened since.
Yeah.
But at the time, he was as there's so many kind of innuendos and so on with all this kind of stuff. But at the time, as a young boy, I was just absolutely blown away by his outfits, by his arrogance, by the fact that my mum and dad were just disgusted, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, he hit all the right buttons.
Yes, you did. Yes. It's just every phrase you say, though, kind of seems to have a double meaning these days.
Yeah. I think it's still good. As you say, he's blotted his copybook, but I think it's one of the funny things with Gary was when it was all going on and he went to Vietnam. He ran away to Vietnam, and they were trying to interview him, and some person was trying to interview him, and his minder, or manager, whoever was out there with him, said, "You've got to speak to him before 10 o'clock." And I think the meaning being he's already pissed at 10, from 10 o'clock onwards. He was pissed
in the morning.
He said, "You got to get him before 10 o'clock." So he's out in Vietnam getting smashed out of his face.
Oh, Rock and Roll Part 3. Yeah.
And then he came back, didn't he? He came back to say it to save his name because he actually came back voluntarily and he was sort of slung into jail.
Mm. Mm.
But so I think around then I think Gary, let's and then it's Alvin Stardust on safer territory here now. I
Yeah.
remember hearing my cuckoo on Radio Luxembourg, which used to hear in the evening. It goes through the phase and static. So hearing my cuckoo for the first time, and that would have been 73. And I think that was even bigger than Gary Glitter. I think Michael Couture. I'm just thinking how that finished up into David Bowie's Aladdin Sane. But that was probably the first album I bought. I remember I bought it for Driving Saturday, would have been about that time.
Okay. Yeah.
And that was it. There's no turning back, Gerard. I was gone.
Did you dress like a glam rocker?
We're encumbered old, Gerard. But what
Was
people
it
used to
Bay City Rollers? Was it?
I was going to say that was huge. You can't believe how big things like that were in Scotland and in Glasgow and in Cumbernauld. The sort of huge, wide flared trousers cut off at the calf. Not always with the tartan, like the Bay City Rollers had the tartan around the stuff and the braces. That was huge, and it was kind of a greaser, a rocker version of the Bay City Rollers, what everyone looked like.
Right.
And
Yeah.
then, now I do remember actually, before I go back to folk, I remember when Clockwork Orange came out, suddenly everyone had these crombies, older than me, people older than me, but the kind of gang people. Suddenly everyone was dressed like Clockwork Orange, crombies and bowler hats. Weird looks. So where people get these things from, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then, so the biggest thing after Clockwork Orange look was the Bay City Rollers look. But again, they took it from the street.
Yes.
It
Yeah.
wasn't. They didn't design it. They took it. They took it and glammed it up, popped it up.
Mm.
But that look, that cut off, big wide trousers cut off at the calf, and ludicrous look. But that's the way we were.
Yeah. Boot
So
boys. Everyone was cool, aren't they?
boot boys.
Yeah.
I think it's the football. Yeah, where did all the boot boys go?
Yeah.
Because that sort of came in a bit later. I think it's when people started getting their hair cut a bit shorter. I don't remember DMs in Glasgow or Cumbernauld. I mean, lots of platform boots. They have lots of platform shoes and boots, which are quite heavy beasts. You clump around like Frankenstein and those things, but not DMs themselves. Some people like them, and they like the fluorescent socks. The
Okay.
platform boots and fluorescent socks, where you had to have your trousers up to your calf to show off your fluorescent socks. What a look! You should come back.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's overdue. That's
But so I'll still carry on. This is going to be a long story, isn't it? But one thing is about David Bowie. So I got into Bowie and stuff and watching Top of the Pops. And then I remember in school, one day in school, I heard some girl talking in the class that she'd gone to see David Bowie last night. You can go to get you. I was absolutely stunned. You can actually go and see these people. I hadn't grasped that you could go to gigs, that such things existed, concerts and things. These people were even real people, like David Bowie, Alvin Stardust, Gary Glitter. They were just things on TV.
mm,
And someone had actually gone to see David Bowie. Absolutely stunned. It took a while I still didn't get into that. Going to gigs, didn't grasp it. That I could, she could do it, but could I do that? Didn't even cross my mind.
mm.
But remember that as a thing. And years later, in the punk rock era, I started to curse my parents. If I'd stayed in London at that time, 73, 74, I would have been like Mick Jones living in London in the Clash biography. He talks about going to gigs all the time and seeing Queen and Mott the Hoople. I think all these bands in small venues and pubs. And he was young, but they got into the pubs. And I remember reading that book and thinking that should have been me. Because I had the spark, it hit me. I was hit with the light, the realization that music was me. And if I'd had that spark in London, I would have gone to these gigs. I'd like to think so. Whereas up in Cumbernauld, there wasn't that option. There was nowhere to, I say this girl in school went to see David Bowie. That's quite a struggle to get to Glasgow from Cumbernauld at night and back.
Mm.
Um,
Did you think of yourself as an Englishman in Scotland?
Yeah. Yeah, it was all very confusing. I remember seeing an England versus Scotland football match and thinking, who do I support?
Right.
Who
Right.
am I? So I was going alien, like man who fell to earth, man who fell to Cumbernauld.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I felt more not national, but my state was football or music. That was my country,
Yeah.
and I think that's the way I felt ever since. Really, and because they're moving around, I never felt linked to a place,
Mm.
linked to thoughts or feelings more than places. So I never understood nationalism, and maybe because of that, because it's kind of forced upon me. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. We move on to
So
no.
yeah. So glam rock, etc. So when did punk rock hit your consciousness?
Yeah, this is it. Kind of drifted in. I left school at 16 in 1974. I remember that the 16s came out that year.
Ah, right. Yeah.
Very apt that summer. And I left school. I just couldn't stand it. I was very good at writing, uh, but I was even then thinking in '74. I think I want to get back to London. I mean, this is in my mind, and I started playing truant and not bothering. And the exams came too late. The O levels we had then in the summer, June. Was it June '74? It was just too late. I'd already gone. I was gone.
Right.
My mind was in London, uh, and I was actually in the top stream at the school, and the stream you're expected to go to. No one was meant to leave at that stream. Um, Everyone was meant to go on to A levels and university. We're in that kind of crowd, and so I was sort of the only person in my class who left. And then my parents forced me into work. Bastards, bastards. I was quite had a great December of '74. Well, obviously with music, I was playing music all the time um, at home, and I just loved it. That was my life. I can live like that forever. Just be at home, play music. Someone's caring, providing me with food and a house.
Yeah.
Then they forced me out to work, and I thought, well, I've got to get a job. And I don't think it was the most glamorous thing, and the thing that would get me to London, strangely, which I didn't even think music was a career
Mm.
or writing being a career. So I went to advertising. I thought advertising sounds quite glamorous. So I applied to be an office boy or applied to an advertising agency, got a job as an office boy. Um, Thinking this is in there, thinking this isn't as glamorous as the packaging.
Well, it's advertising.
Yeah, it's advertising. I think this is great. This is glamour,
Yeah.
And then I left that job. I lasted about 4 months in that one. Then I went to another place. I think I got sacked for not turning up or just going out. I used to go on errands, going to take stuff to some place, and just spend the whole afternoon drifting around Glasgow city centre. Come back to get your coat. Where were you? Oh, the buses were late. The buses was. Eventually, I was caught out with that one. Then I went to the next one, the next agency, Peter Menzies Advertising, and it was there that punk rock broke. The year punk rock broke, which I think was 75, 70. I was buying the NME. I used to get the train in every day. It's a half an hour train journey, and I used to buy the NME. Mainly the NME. I think I bought stuff buying sounds. I think one of the things with the music papers there, one time at Cumbernauld, we used to go out on Saturday night. There's a disco in the town centre, and I used to go to this disco, and then you go and get chips afterwards. And we
Yeah.
went to get the chips, and the chip shop guy had a copy of Melody Maker, and he was wrapping the chips in Melody Maker. How old fashioned this is! First time I seen a music paper. First time I seen a music paper.
Oh, well.
I remember getting home and I was reading this wrapping. This is amazing. These things, and then for some reason I didn't buy the Melody Maker. I started buying the NME. And also, it's the classic enemy: Charles Shaw Murray, Nick Kent,
Right.
Max Bell, those days. So another light bulb moment, really. I think this is great, these music papers. And then so I started reading them on the train. I had this hour-long commute every day, and I used to read the music papers. And then I started reading about punk rock in '75. I thought, this is me. I thought, this is me. They're writing about me here. Um, I'm part of this. Straight away, I identified You know, they're saying people like Aerosmith used to be called punks and Kiss were called punks, but I could tell they weren't. You know, they didn't bother buying any of their stuff. They're using the word punk for them, Max Bell especially.
Mm.
But then when the Pistol stuff started appearing, you know, the first reviews, I thought, yeah, I just thought this is me. This is me.
Before you heard them or anything?
Before I heard it, yeah, all you could do is read about the way they're dressed and the attitudes. And I think I must have bought the sound, started buying sounds as well, because you had the John Ingham one, the Caroline Cooper's Melody Maker. But they were also, I think if I saw the word punk on Melody Maker, I'd have bought it. I was on the cover, so I read the Caroline Coon ones, because they were all writing early, before there's any, long before there's records or anything. That's about 75, 75, then 76. It was really kicking off. They were doing big articles, big pieces, and I was just thinking, this is me. This is me. You know.
I assume you're thinking I've got to get to London now.
Well, I always the whole thing of advertising was to get to London. And this is like saying, well, London's calling. You know, this is definitely London's calling.
To the faraway town.
It's very far away. And I think, yeah, at this point, 70, 75, 76, 76. I'm going to London. I used to get there's a night. I found out there's a night bus you could get on a Friday night. Left Glasgow at 11 o'clock Friday night. Get to London 6 o'clock in the morning, and then also leave London at 11 o'clock Sunday night and get back to Glasgow 7 o'clock in the morning. And I started getting that bus. I started not every weekend, but I'd get that bus and be in London, spend the weekend in London. You know, the Cambernauld disco didn't cut it for me anymore.
So where did you stay when you went down?
Either stations, Euston Station, very nice seats at Euston Station. I can recommend them if we change now. Or yeah, just walk around. So you see, I think I slept on the Circle Line. There's days that you used to go all the way around. You could get on there, get on at night. I think you used to run all night. Did it run all night or something? Or you go until it stops and you get on again. You spend a couple of hours and get back on it again. You learn these things quite quickly, how to survive. And one time, the Pogues, Shane MacGowan, when I'd gone to see the Damned, the time I'd gone to see the Damned, which this is the big spark, it really kicked off there. I saw the Damned at the Hope and Anchor. This is when I met Mark Perry and said about the fanzines. This is where it sort of went from being a consumer, if you like. I was consuming punk, consuming music, consuming London, to suddenly being part of it. You know, the fanzine thing. So Mark Perry's Sniffing Glue. I thought, I can do that. I could do that. Or, you know, a slow realization that I could do that. I couldn't think about being in a band or anything like that. It seemed to be too far removed. But actually writing, because I was good at writing. I liked writing. And so in reading Sniffing Glue, I thought, yeah, I could write this. This is shit. I can write better than this. Probably the very words I used to Mark Perry at the Damned gig. And I said, oh, I could write for you. And he says, no, you're going to do your own. Fuck off, do your own. And you know, I will. All that stuff is in my mind. Then after the gig, Shane was there, and he was fascinated by me being Scottish. I think he picked up on the Irish because he's being Irish. He loves his Irish stuff, and so he kind of picked up this Gaelic connection. And he invited me back to stay at his place. And so this is long before the Pogues. He just had his ear bitten off. It was on the cover of the Sounds.
Yeah.
And I could see him with the Clash gig at the ICA of the year. It was almost that week.
Okay.
So he was kind of famous with his ear, and he sort of went and stayed at his place. And then the next day he showed me around these record shops, which I'd never heard of before. It wasn't Rough Trade then. So there was actually the Damned gig. Rough Trade had a little stall.
Okay.
Had a little stall there that didn't have a shop yet. They had a stall. I didn't buy anything. What a fool. Look back in these things. But so Shane took me around these shops. There's one weird record shop near Carnaby Street, and I bought Metallic KO from there, and I think Nuggets. Then we went back to his place. We played them. We played all his records, and I think Rock and Roll Heart. I bought Rock and Roll Heart as well. Lou Reed. And we were playing all these things, and I think Rock and Roll Heart as well. Lou Reed. We were playing all these things, and So that was quite amazing. Look, in retrospective, that was, it's almost like it's destined to happen about the spirit you're talking about. That
Yes.
these things were destined to me to be at that gig and see Mark, and then this, not just going back and sleeping at the Euston Station, but having this whole thing with Shane, and then him showing me these record shops, and I think he was kind of saying, yeah, what Mark said was right. You should go and write about Glasgow. So I think he really sort of encouraged me. I think that's Ripped and Torn, and then started that night, if you like. And I went back to Scotland, and I spoke to my mate Skid Kid, who was also into the music, into the punk and stuff. But he would never come. He wouldn't do these trips. But he said, I said we should do this fanzine, and he said, yeah, it's a good idea. And then that was November, probably November '76, about a week after the Damned gig. I created Ripped and Torn. I was still working in the advertising agency. I'd been promoted at that point. I'd gone from office boy to some kind of logistics coordinator, which I was very good at, by the way. It could have been a career.
Well, you could have been a contender.
The weird thing was, I wasn't in the creative side. Oh, blimey. There's older Glaswegian dust coming up now. Coming up with the memories.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't in the copywriting or the artistic departments. I was in this kind of, from the office boy taking things around. I was then kind of moved into this job where I was contacting newspapers, sending the copy out and checking newspapers, proofreading everything, making sure everything was in the right place, all the stuff from the copywriters, the advertising, the art department, everything was coming together, going to the right places to create the adverts. And so I was very good at it, but I wanted to be creative. I wanted to be a copywriter. If I thought I was in that, that's where the glamour was.
Yeah.
And I remember going to the after the punk rock thing started. I think Ripped and Torn 1. Sheila from the art department helped me use the machines to create the cover, and I'd cut pictures out of the sounds and NME, and she'd use this machine to help me see the cover. It's kind of like very dotty, and she's expanded this picture cut out from sound, so it became, you see all the dots. She gets a mention. I think the first couple of episode or first 3 is like thanks to Sheila. But she was, so they knew I was doing Ripped and Torn. So I'm jumping on a bit here, but they knew I was doing Ripped and Torn, the art department, and they thought it was great. They thought it was a fantastic laugh. Then I remember taking Anarchy in the UK when Anarchy in the UK came out, and I bought it at lunchtime. I took it back, and they had a record player in the arts. Glamour they were. They had a record player in the arts department. I remember playing Anarchy in the UK in there. These guys. And they were disparaging. Afraid to say they didn't move. They didn't see the zeitgeist. So it's just glam rock. Thought,
so Ripped and Torn took off pretty quickly because everything was moving at lightning speed at that point, I guess, in terms of punk rock exploding and that.
Yeah. What happened? The story there is I managed to print 10 copies on the office photocopier, which is in the typing pool. So I had to sneak down pages with other stuff I was photocopying and run off 10 pages. It took me about a week to print 100 sheets. 10 it was a 10-page issue, and there's 100 sheets were printed on the office photocopier. And I was quite happy. That was it. We'd done it. Then I sent one to Mark, and then I sent one to Rough Trade because I used to see them at the Damned gig, and they had adverts in the paper. And I sent one to Compendium, who also had adverts in the newspaper in the NME. So one to Compendium, one to Rough Trade, one to Mark, and I had 7 left. Skid had a couple of them. I had a couple of them, and that was it. Fine, move on. And then I got a letter. This is all handwritten in those days. A letter came back from Rough Trade. Well, we love your fanzine. Can you send us 200 copies?
Wow.
And next day, a letter from Compendium. We love your fanzine. Can you send us 200 copies? Well, okay. Well, I can't do. That's a lot of photocopying. That's a lot of sneaking down the photocopy. I'm never going to do this. So I went to a printer, and nearby the work, just looked in Yellow Pages, went to this printer, took my pages down, expecting him to laugh me out the building. And he just said, well, yeah, I can do that. I can do 400 photocopies for you of these. He said, it'll be cheaper if you do 500, and I'll do it in this litho print machine. Oh, sounds great. This giant machines. He showed me what it looked like. And I said, okay, let's do that. About a week's wages. It cost me a week's wages to do this, which is a commitment. But I said to do it. So he printed up these. I went down a few days later, and I had a bundle of big boxes. It took me a few days to get all the boxes back home, and then I had to staple them all. I hadn't grasped stapling 500 copies, and I had no idea what to say. Anyway, I worked out how to get the copies to Rough Trade and Compendium. I think it was a Red Star. I used to take them to a station sent by Red Star, and I had 100 copies left. What am I going to do with this 100 copies? What am I going to do with these ones? So I took them around record shops in Glasgow, the independent record shops, and most of them, all say 6 out of 7 said, we'll take them. Sale or return, they said. Sale or return. What's that? It means give it to us, and if you sell them, we'll give you some money. If you don't sell them, we'll give them back. Okay, is this the way it works? Is that how the enemy works? Anyway, I had no choice in the matter, so I dished these things out to these shops, about 10 each shop, and went back a week later, and every shop had sold the lot. One even had a copy in the front copy, the photocopy of the front cover, and put it in the window. I thought, my God, I'm in the window. Like, I'm next to Leo Sayer. Yeah, and they said they sold them. I said, have you got any more? I said, yeah, so I took down what I had left, and they sold as well. Who's buying these? Who is buying these? Who is buying these? But
Who was buying them? Did you make connections because of that?
Only through Sandy Robson, Alex Ferguson, who I interviewed for the second issue, because they'd put a poster up in one of the record shops, band members wanted, and it had a picture of Iggy Pop. They said, Into, Stooges, MC5, Aleister Crowley, Velvet Underground, other things. I thought, so I phoned them up, and they knew who I was. Oh, yeah, you're Ripton Torn.
Wow.
Yeah. And so a few people, I met a few people, not the first issue, probably about the third issue. It was starting to, I was still in Glasgow doing them, and I started to meet people. But I was going to say, to go back to what you said about that, how quick it took off. You're saying things exploded really quickly, and I was right in there in that sense. But I was still in Glasgow, the only flaw in the plan. So yeah, it's all going great. I was in Glasgow, and I didn't know who was buying it, and I ran into a few people. I remember going to a party somewhere in Glasgow, a band called 8 Miles High, who claimed they were punk. Well, no, I don't think they were punk.
Yeah.
I don't think they were that punk. But there's another guy, Rev Vaulting, ran into Rev Vaulting, and it's in issue 4, Ripton Torn 4, where we're going to see the Damned. The Damned came to London, to Glasgow, supporting Mark Bolan.
All right.
The T-Rex tour. This is the first time a punk band was going to play Glasgow. I think we've had the Pistols Anarchy tour, all that stuff. Let's not. We can spend a day talking about that stuff, because one of the interesting parts is that the advertising agency I was working for did advertising for the Apollo Theatre, where the Pistols were going to play, where everyone played, and the guy there, Jan Pasternak, used to love me. Used to ask me personally, even though I wasn't doing that job anymore, but to go down and be like the office boy and go down and take stuff to him, and we'd sit and talk about music.
Oh, right.
And he knew I was doing Ripton Torn, and so I'm not sure how, but I probably told him. But I remember when the Pistols was cancelled, he called me. I was like, Tony, you got to go to the Apollo. I'm on my way. My coat's on. I'm off. And we're sitting there with Jan, and he's saying, it's just so apologetic. There's nothing I could do, Tony. Nothing I could do. He said they'd close the whole thing down. So I've got other bars and concert, small places. The council, Glasgow Council, threatened to close everything down if I put the Pistols on.
Blimey.
Yeah, he said, really, I did my best. I did my best. It was amazing to think of that. I'm an 18-year-old boy, and this guy's running all this whole stuff. He just felt he had to tell me personally that it wasn't his fault, that he really wanted to put that gig on. Also, man, I got to see a lot of bands. I could go to the party. Annoyingly, if I was living in Glasgow, I'd have gone every night, because I could just walk through the door. Oh yeah, Tony, all right, go through. I'm going to see Black Oak, Arkansas, which kind of put me off going to see random bands. The noise, that was noisy. And we put the Runaways on. We had the Runaways came and played. There's about 500 of us there in the place. I think it's like Jan was like, "I've got the Runaways, Tony." And but I think of those people who were there, it's a bit like the Velvet Underground's first album. It didn't sell very many when it came out, but everyone who bought it formed a band.
Yeah.
It was like going to see the Runaways in Glasgow. Everyone there formed a band. I think everyone in that crowd was into punk, in the loop. But so yeah, go back the Damned supported T-Rex on the first night. Mark Bolan cancelled it because he had a sore throat. I can sympathise with him now.
Yeah.
But at the time, also irate, and we managed to get to the Damned's hotel. This guy Rev Volting, he kind of so knew where the Damned were staying, and about 5 of us trooped off up to the Damned's hotel to complain. I said, "Why didn't you play? You could have played. You weren't ill. You could have played." And he's saying, and we managed to get in. We managed to get into the hotel room. In the hotel room in Glasgow, and it was like Dave saying, we couldn't play because Mark kicked us off to get the rest of the tour if we played without him. And I said, we've spent all our money. We can't. He's always going to be on tomorrow night. So it's no use to us. We're drunk all our money now. We had this song. This is all in Ripton Torn 4. I put this in, and it's Rev Volting. There's a lot of the abusing of the Damned. And I'm going to go to his flat. First time I've seen someone with a flat who didn't live with their parents.
Right.
Again, things going whirlwind pace. People actually live by themselves. My God. And they had nothing in his flat, nothing in there. I thought this is the way people live. Had nothing. Just bare floorboards, not posh bare floorboards, just dusty wood. And nothing. Well, there was a table, I think a table and one chair, and that was it. And he went on to form Rev Volting and the Backstabbers. After I left to go to London, he went and formed this band. I would have been in that band if I'd stayed. But that was the very beginnings, I think, of a punk clique, you want to call it, a punk group. With that Damn gig, this meeting and going to those of us who went there, were committed, committed fans, and so we sort of kept in touch. But then I was already moving on. I was then February 77. It came to a head at work. My immediate bosses were saying, ripped and torn. At that point, my office was covered in punk posters. Not just the ones from the Apollo, which were vaguely acceptable, but I think I had the Sex Pistols one that was from the council gig. I had that from the wall in my office. Where's that now? But all cutting out of the enemy, and we just get the newspapers. So the Filth and the Fury, Bill Grundy stuff, which we didn't get Bill Grundy in Scotland. That
was
never. It's only a London-based thing, but obviously the newspapers. So it was like, Tony, your punks on the papers, and we used to get all the papers every day. As an advertising agency, you had to get all the papers, and so I cut out all the covers, all the Filth and Fury. I had it all plastered around my office, and it was coming to a head that I either had to concentrate on my job or punk or Ripped and Torn, and there's only one choice. And so I left the job, and then went to London, which is at 77. So that was that's how I got back. Now finally, I'd moved to London, and I'll say Sandy and Alex who I'd met through their advert in the record shop, and then interviewed them. and then they moved. They were both moving to London. The same thing. I thought, well, great, you're part. This is a new scene. This is your band will be a spearhead of this new scene. And they're both 10 years older. They're about 20 at that point. They're about 28. And neither of them wanted to stay in or Paisley where they were living. Neither of them wanted to stay in Paisley either. Both wanted to go to London. The same thing as me, really. The band was a way to get out of Scotland and down to London.
Yeah.
And
Just to be clear for people who might not know, Sandy went on to be the music journalist,
yeah,
and Alex went on to be in ATV and then Psychic TV.
that's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. Yeah. Absolutely. They moved down, and they were staying in a bedsit in Willesden Green, and I went down and I kind of stayed with them. I think they said, "Oh, come down and see us if you're ever in London." I showed up with all my bags and slept on their floor for about 3 or 4 days. And then I went to Rough Trade. I went to Rough Trade and saying, "Oh, I'm Tony from Ripton Torn. Do you ken? Yeah, you do ken." And because I've got nowhere to stay. I was trying to cut a long story short. I'm not sure how it happened, but it was miraculous that someone behind the counter at Rough Trade said, "Oh, come to stay at our place."
Oh,
And they had
wow.
a squat in Frestonia, which is down near Latimer Road, an old pub, which was squatted. The ground floor was gutted, but the top 2 floors were like normal rooms. Never heard of squatting before. Everything's new. And they said, "Oh yeah, come and stay in here. Come and stay in the squat." So suddenly, I was living. I had a house. I had a place to stay in London, and I was in Frestonia, which became quite famous in itself as a broke away from the United Kingdom and formed its own independent state of Frestonia. And I was there. I was in amongst all that nonsense. And
There was quite a lot of hippies there, wasn't there?
it was made. It
Certainly.
was 90%, 99% hippies.
Yeah.
This is a little stretch of houses. Always one street, 2 streets that had all been compulsorily purchased by the GLC when they're going to extend the Westway was right behind it, and they're going to do so. They bought these places to extend the Westway or do some kind of thing, and then their plans changed, so all these houses were left empty. They'd kicked everyone out, all the normal people left these streets, and they became occupied by the hippies. These kind of people knew what they were doing from the old state. They weren't all just wasters. These are really together people who are living alternative lifestyles. Moved into the houses, did them all up, and so you had this whole kind of enclave in West London of a kind of hippie environment, the Frestonia, named after Freston Road.
Did that give you a different outlook to the sort of punk cliche of never trust a hippie and so on?
Hugely, hugely. And maybe being in Glasgow, because the hippie punk thing was never so clear. You weren't really dressed like the punks you see. You expected what a punk looked like. Everyone was a bit long-haired, greasy jeans. It's a rocker look, really. It's a kind of a rocker. Maybe a leather jacket was enough a signifier that you weren't one of the normal. And even just wild hair rather than spiky hair. And so I think there wasn't that line, that definitive line, which I can see why Malcolm was saying that, and people had this thing, never trust hippie, because the hippies kind of had sold out, if you like. They'd gone to, the hippie ethos, the alternative lifestyle, had become like Virgin Records, like Richard Branson. But in the real life, you see, like Preston Road, there was definitely these people were living alternative, kept the alternative life spark alive.
Yeah.
And it was very eye-opening to me. But again, I didn't realize everywhere wasn't like this. I thought
Yes.
everywhere was kind of free and easy and full of crazy people.
I'd like to take you off on a little tangent because you just mentioned Malcolm McLaren. And we've talked about this before, but I think it's probably worth exploring. There's a kind of historical narrative that appears to me to be solidifying into accepted fact that McLaren was just a kind of Machiavellian kind of not to be trusted, unhelpful presence, whereas Rotten was the talent and so on. So basically, it seems to me to be getting painted into a kind of good guy, bad guy thing. But you've talked about that before because you hung about with Malcolm McLaren occasionally, didn't you?
Yeah. I was like say, I didn't say friends with him, but certainly spoke to him. And as Sophie Richmond at Glitterbest was my link into that, the underworld of the Pistols, the inner circle of the Pistols, because I think Glitterbest, the Pistols management company, had an office in a block two floors above from Copeland's place, Miles Copeland's thing, where Mark Perry was based, and all those records. And so I used to go and see Mark, go to Mark's office, if you like, Sniffing Blues office. Then I go upstairs and see Sophie, and she hadn't grasped that I was living in London, which is good for me, because she thought each time I turned up in there, she thought I'd come down from Glasgow, and she'd be giving me stuff. I'll take this back to Glasgow and do this. And sometimes I had to begin with. I had taken stuff back to Glasgow. So I'm trying to think when. Also, I remember putting stickers up on the army recruiting office in Glasgow, sticking a "No Future" sticker, which she'd given me. I remember telling her that. So I must have taken stuff back, but she was my link into it, and Sophie was very nice. And she used to tell me all the Pistols and that. And sometimes Malcolm would come in, and we'd chat. Sophie, Malcolm, and me would chat. And if you've ever met Malcolm, he talks. All you have to do is say hi, Malcolm, and half an hour later, he's still talking, still responding.
Yeah,
He's a talker. And so was it a case of, oh, did you manage to get the information out of Malcolm? Yeah, I said hi to him once, and he told me his whole concept of punk rock. But so yeah, I also, because of that, I always thought Malcolm was the main man, and I think the awful Anarchy in the UK. Whether I was thinking about it at that time or was it later, that whether he obviously wrote, to me, it's obvious that he'd written these lyrics. I mean, not the music, but the lyrics. And Johnny was just Johnny, And there's the book, Paul Gorman's book about Malcolm, which goes into quite a lot of detail about those times, the very early times. I also talks about funny how Malcolm being a hippie, So Malcolm being don't never trust a hippie, started talking about his own life, not really just the concept of hippie, but how he developed out of hippiedom and how he felt betrayed by the hippie ideals. So I think Johnny, is despicable. I think he's a despicable man. He's disgraced. There's always stuff about Trump and all that stuff now. He's living in America. I think that's just appalling. And it's sad that people are getting to punk now. Young people now, they say, we'll see that and think that's what punk is. That or liking Trump and he's gone from being astutely cynical to just being a grumpy old man. And his shock value for shock value's sake. It's not. There's no shock. There's no reason for it. There's no focus. No reason to be shocking. He's just being shocking for this. This is hilarious.
On a similar note, I'm jumping ahead a tiny bit here, but what you were saying there kind of reminded me that I do see on Facebook another accepted narrative that seems to be developing, particularly in the United States, that the Pistols were just music business puppets or whatever, and that it wasn't till Crass till there was a real punk band in inverted commas. What would your take be on that?
I think Malcolm was the instigator, and the Pistols themselves, the individuals, were. I can see the meaning of puppet, but not as puppety as he expected. They broke out their puppetry. And certainly Malcolm was finding people to fit into his theory, and these people fitted in. And they'd all say that. All of them say that, don't they? Steve, Paul, Glenn, all say that Malcolm pulled us together. It wasn't for Malcolm, there wouldn't have been a Pistols, and they wouldn't have a Pistols name. They wouldn't have gigged. They wouldn't have been a band. You see, it was for Malcolm, that would be nothing. So they're quite clear about that. It was a band, Malcolm. In a sense, you could say like Basie Rollers, that Bill Patterson forming the Basie Rollers. He did the same thing in Glasgow with them. He kind of saw there's something happening, and there's a feeling in the air, and he pulled the band Salvation. He took the band Salvation and turned them into the Basie Rollers. And with the whole image, the whole look, he just created a look. And they went sensational. And that's just very similar. Like, you can see my Glasgow roots there coming, because that people outside Glasgow, Edinburgh, would know no concept of that, how the Basie Rollers were manufactured and created a sensation. Huge, how big they were. And they stayed within their confines, whereas the Pistols very quickly broke out. Very quickly, but also didn't last very long. What would have happened if they'd done a second album? Would it have been like the Monkees, where they've demanded their own songs? Would Sid have demanded to have two songs on it, or like Nelson with a gas? Or, would have gone mad? And would it have gone like the Monkees did that, and they were great, absolutely exploded. The Monkees, they created their own songs, they were all great. Vicky DeLenz was a sensation, but there was Basie Rollers kind of stayed within their cage, and I think the Pistols, would they have gone? Would they have broken out? Or would they have stayed then? That's kind of the point, really, wasn't it? Would they have stayed within Malcolm's cage and kept? Then there would have been a puppetry. Then it would have just been an image, a public image. But as it was, they broke up and they went their own ways. Again, look at Stephen Paul, did nothing. Nothing since. Mucked about, lived on the reputation ever since. And in that way, they are. And but the catalyst for what they did is indisputable. That it wasn't just music. It wasn't just an Aerosmith or something. They were bigger. They were a cultural smash that was inspired a generation. So regardless of how they were put together, that the impact they had was overrides anything that if it's Malcolm or not, it doesn't matter. It's all together, so it's a totality. And I think for me, when Crass came out, it was the same again. Only when Crass started, that first Feeding of the 5,000 has the same impact. And there was a thing, wow, this is it. This is we've been gone wrong, we've gone decadent in those 2 years. How quickly it was. It wasn't even that 2 years, was it? 78, end of 78. The Crass thing came out. So only a year after the Pistols album. Amazing. Because I remember having that. I went to Small Wonder when I was selling Rips and Torn. I went to Small Wonder record shop, and Pete gave me this cassette. He said, "This band, I'm thinking of signing this band," and gave me this cassette, which was Feeding the 5,000. I remember taking it home. It's all that near Christmas time. I took it home and I played it in the squat, and I thought, this is a bit like UK Subs. But he also gave me loads of leaflets and pamphlets and things they had. He'd given, they'd given to Pete as well. I took all this stuff back, and I'm reading this. I think this is fantastic. And I was listening to the music, played it again and again. I remember going to Rough Trade the next day, kind of speaking to Jeff. Went to the back room in Rough Trade and said, just Small Wonder giving me this cassette of a band called Crass. And I said they're going to be really important. I said, these are going to be really important. And I said, they've got all these leaflets, all these. I was just parroting out all the stuff they said in the leaflets. And that was very Malcolm-y in the sense of that loads of literature around the band. The way the Pistols weren't just a music band, there's all this stuff going on around it. And the Crass, I hadn't actually seen any pictures of them, and there's no pictures in all these leaflets. It's just all this anarchy situation. His pen is writing International Anthem. I think I sent a copy of International Anthem as well. And so you know what that reads like. It's not really anarchistic. It's very impressionistic. But I sort of went to Jeff and said, "This is great. This band's be really important." And I said, "It's a pity they sound like the UK Subs." So the worst thing is the music. They sound like the UK Subs. And he went, "Oh, okay." And then I went back home and I kept playing the cassette again and again. And I thought, no, you know what? This is better than the UK Subs. This is better than the UK Subs. Could there such a thing happen? Could there be such a thing? And then we're going back to Jeff. A couple of years later, said, "Jeff, I spoke to you about Crass." I said, I've changed my mind. He goes, what? Yeah, you think it's not as important as you think it was? And I said, no, it's more important and it's better than the better than the UK subs. And I always
But
remember I wondered,
sorry, go on.
just say if Jeff had been astute enough, he could have stepped in. He could have usurped because Pete hadn't signed him. Pete Stennett at Small Wonder hadn't signed it at that point. He was thinking about it, and so that's the feeding of the 5,000 demo. If Jeff had been astute, listen to me, listen to his boy, he could have jumped in and said, Tony, give me their number, I'll sign them now.
So, as I said to you before we started recording, really, we're kind of entering a period now that's been almost documented to death. So what I'm going to try and do is kind of through tiptoe through bits of it and just like home in on stuff that perhaps hasn't been talked about so much. How successful I am remains to be seen, really. But Ripped and Torn became really well known, didn't it? In the fanzine world, perhaps the biggest fanzine. Would that be fair?
Yeah, I think it's the most respected. I think Sniffing Glue is going down. Is people say if someone said the words about fanzines, if they said Sniffing Glue, you knew they weren't there. But if they said Ripped and Torn, you knew they were there. Because I was at gigs. I'd go and see 30 bands a week. I was out almost all the time, so I was seen, I was known, and through that, Ripped and Torn was becoming his credibility was being established by the fact that I was at gigs, I was out there, whereas Mark wasn't, and other fanzine writers weren't. I think they're all 48 Thrills, Adrian, people like that, John Savage, all those early other fanzines, competitors, if you like, stopped going to gigs. You wouldn't see them at gigs. Or the and his Livewire, Alan Anger's Livewire was coming up, but no one knew what that was. That wasn't, it wasn't. He'd kind of missed the bandwagon, if you like, because that's a very good fanzine, very good guy. And he was at the gigs. But yeah, so I in that sense, because I was around, I actually gave the Ripped and Torn credibility. If I'd known what I was doing, it would have been huge, it would have been bigger. But it's just I was just doing it in a squat, knocking it together in a squat, taking around. Used to take copies to gigs as well, so I'd always go out with a plastic bag full of Ripped and Torns and flog them at the gig, rather than try and get distribution deals and the way people would do a thing properly. Well, so an interesting thing here, so go back to the squats. I think this is a kind of a catalyst for what happened onwards. So everything's drawn me to this London. I'm now in this squat, but everything, the stars have aligned, and I'm living in a place in Frestonia. And then Sandy and Alex, about a week later, Sandy and Alex both moved in. They both left. They left their beds. So they found out they came. I went to see them. So I've got a new place here, 2 Brownlee Road. And next day, they're there with their bag. The opposite of what I did when I turned up on their doorstep in Milton. They turned up on my doorstep with their bags.
Yeah, sure.
So Sandy now tells me that he came a week earlier. He left Alex. He couldn't stand it. His story now is he couldn't stand Alex. So he left Alex and moved in. And then Alex, a week after that, Alex moved in as well. So we had the Scottish Plagues, and then Skid Kid, my mate from Glasgow, from Cumbernauld, he moved down as well. So by about May 77, all 4 of us had moved into this squat. And they called it the Scottish Plague in the Rough Trade book, the history of rough trade. They talk about it. There's even a picture of 4 of us. The Scottish Plague descended. But because they were obviously creative people, these Sandy and Alex creativity is pouring out of them, and they were older. They were 10 years, so they knew what to do. They knew how to do things. And Sandy was doing white stuff. I think he just started white stuff. The Petty Smith fanzines. He was doing that from the squad. And Alex, also a tremendous musician, and he got picked up by Mark. Whether Mark came to the squad, Mark P, because of me, or it's only about 10 minutes away from Rough Trade, so people would drift down. And Mark came, and between him and Alex, they talked about forming a band. Mark first speaking to Alex about having an idea of forming a band, and Alex said, "Oh, I'll play for you." And so they kind of formed a band at that squad. They formed ATV, or Alternative to TV, as it was called then. And then another strange visitor via Mark, because Mark was working with Genesis Peorage. I think how they're linked together, I'm not quite sure how they actually got together, but I think he wanted Genesis to be the drummer for ATV. And so Jen was around the house a lot. And you can always tell if Genesis had been around because that place would be covered in throbbing gristle stickers.
What did you
So
make of Genesis?
phenomenal. Um, it's a bit like Malcolm in a sense. They have their vision. You know, you think, look back and they have their vision and they'll tell you their vision. They always go around telling everybody what they want to do. And all backing up with huge facts and being very fascinating and charming. I remember he brought the Beach Boys single with the Charles Manson B-side.
Oh, yeah.
Which mind blowing. Not mind blowing to me that actually existed. And Charles Manson I'd vaguely heard of, and he really told us the whole Manson story and the context of it. And then the fact that it got to the stage that there was a B-side, and then he got his name taken off the credits.
Mm.
But he actually had the single. You know, only time I've ever seen it in real life. And he brought it to the squad casually. And I remember the album came out. I think actually did the first album came out. I didn't buy it. I think he had copies on him. This trying to sell them to everyone he saw, you know, like me with my Ripped and Torns. But
Yeah.
I didn't buy one. Madness. Why didn't I buy one? But he was such a visionary is the only expression for you saying what's he like? A visionary. And so I say like Malcolm. And the next person I thought was like that, just to jump ahead, was Penny Rimbaud of Crass. When you're saying again the Crass Pistols connection. These three people were so out there. Not a human being, they're not human in that sense. These were figureheads, but living legends. So I had to explain when you meet people like that it's just charismatic, it's a charisma, a drive. And think, this don't seem to be part of the human race. This seems to be something else and beyond it. I've actually met Richard Branson as well, and he has a touch of that about him. I can see how he would have been like that when he first started Virgin.
Yeah.
This incredible drive, incredible vision and charisma, and to get things done. But those two, so yeah, the Genesis is astounding, and I'm amazed that little squad had Alex, Sandy, myself, and Jen all sitting around. And this is long before Psychic TV, when Alex moved on to play with Jen later. So even that was, you know, Genesis must have been picking up that there, right? Even in those days, that Alex was someone who was useful to use in the future.
Mm. Mm.
And again, Alex has said he was performing with Jen. He said later, I think I read it somewhere that the Germans of Psychic TV were already starting in Throbbing Gristle, and he would. So I think they used to go and rehearse. I think ATV used to go and rehearse at Martello Road, at Throbbing Gristle's headquarters. And so then, and that's when Jen was on the drums for ATV. And I think then they were probably playing what became Psychic TV songs at that point. Phenomenal time. So you said about how things coming together, the spirit of that lot, you know, including myself, was phenomenal, and how we all just drawn by it seemed like coincidence.
Would you say that's the same spirit then running through all of those people, yourself included?
Yeah, I could never see myself from the outside, so I don't know whether I've got that drive. Or people say that about me, that I've got this drive and this charisma. Because if you just do it, you just carry on with your life. Like presumably Jen and Penny and Malcolm will just carry on with their life. It just happens to be phenomenal people. I think whether we're together helped that spirit grow, because it wasn't weird. It wasn't like being in Glasgow. Oh, you can't do that. You shouldn't be doing that. You should get a proper job. You know, why are you doing that? It's rubbish. You're never going to make it. Because you're all with people, all with this vision. You know, we're going to do it. We're going to create. That they helped each other to actually continue that, you know, through the struggle. The struggle from the thought, was it thought to impression? I think it was a Lou Reed song, from thought to something.
Was Frestonia full of that spirit, apart from the people you mentioned?
There were a few people who get congregated. The one building was called the Factory. It was obviously an old factory, small factory, and that was taken over by these guys and girls who tried to create an Andy Warhol. They call it the Factory, and they tried to create an Andy Warhol vibe there. And there was Miss Nazi who started writing. Miss Nazi and Caris, I think, both were in there, and they both started writing for Ripped and Torn. So then people were in that creative vibe, got gravitated towards Bramley Road, our squad, because they knew Ripped and Torn was there. But I know Sandy and Alex despised these people, despised all the hippies, despised the factory lot. They thought it's all a disgrace, but they didn't mind the free rent.
Yeah.
But put up with the hippie revolution.
So would you say that what the spirit seems to be a woefully inadequate way of putting it, but given that it's the only word we've got right now, would you say that is that manifests in the creativity? So in other words, is the sort of spirit contained in Crass records or Throbbing Gristle records or ATV records or Ripped and Torn, or is that just a sort of side product of something more important, being the culture that produces that stuff?
I think the spirit, I think you look at it in the way that the spirit has actually created all these cultures and things for itself to thrive. The spirit itself is a living thing, and is consciously, if you like, creating an environment where Throbbing Gristle can exist, can become, where ATV can become, where Ripped and Torn can become. Like, for instance, the Shane McGowan thing for me, that if he hadn't put me up that night, maybe I wouldn't have done the fanzine. Maybe that's enough inspired. So things like that, it's bringing people together. So yeah, so I think the creativity is a byproduct of a bigger driving force, which we don't really understand what it's doing. And so I know in later years I thought of things like Gaia, where the Earth being a living thing, and that makes more sense. That made sense because after I've thought about these things, how does all this happen? I think, well, that makes more sense. That there is a sentient being. The Earth itself is sentient, and that's what's moving things forward. And it's a much bigger picture than we can comprehend. Which is why you have wars and famine and disease, because this is all part of a bigger picture. We're just a small segment of that picture. But certainly to see, the Throbbing Gristle album coming out, that's all part of the plan. It's all part of the grand scheme.
Okay.
And so that because of that created How Much Longer, for example.
Yeah.
If it wasn't for that wouldn't have happened. Or if Sandy wasn't doing White Stuff, he wouldn't have done the Sounds work he wrote, the stuff he wrote in Sounds. They had Malcolm McLaren on the cover of Sounds, which then pushed that agenda. So basically, is it free will? Now we're talking here about free will, aren't we? Do we do these things of our own accord, or are we being driven by forces outside of our control? That's what the question is there. And if I say that, what I'm saying now sounds like, well, there's no point in us doing anything because we're all preordained. There's something bigger making us do these things. And I think so also is that if it can make the opportunity, but if you don't take it, it'll move on to somebody. That opportunity will go somewhere else.
I think it's quite hard to put into words, perhaps, because to an extent it's experiential, I think, and it's very difficult to sort of get academic about something that requires an element of experience. Is that a fair comment, do you
think? Yeah, I think experience. So, you mean I don't know. No, I don't know what you mean.
Okay. Oh, well, that's probably because I'm getting too
experiment. What's the first word?
What I mean is, when you're in the middle of something like that, it all sort of seems to fit into place.
Yeah.
Whereas
you get a feeling. So you get a feeling that this is right.
Yeah, a vibration, if you like. So,
Mm-hmm.
so that's a part of it, and I think trying to talk about it on 30, 40 years later or whatever is missing that aspect of it, and
Yeah,
therefore it kind of clouds descriptions of it to some
yeah.
extent.
I think it's, so we go back to your thing about the pistols. People saying the pistols are just image, just puppets. There's people saying that weren't there at the time, and soon that spirit, that energy that was driving it, would it take, say you take that away 30, 40 years later, and all you're looking at is it pictures and hearing music. You're not actually seeing the whole context of it. And it's saying it's something you can't can't really. All you can do is explain it, but you can't really experience it. You can't see someone. You've got to go back and see the Pistols and experience it. Like it's like seeing a tribute band, for example.
Yes.
A tribute band could be great, play everything note perfect, but it's not. It's not the spirit.
Yeah.
And then you say, yeah, that wasn't what the band was like.
Well, we'll come back to this
Yeah,
as the sort of story, the timeline moves on, I'm sure.
but I
But
think there's something that you did say that as experience is that I think because it can say to somebody, you can be a great painter, you can be a great artist, you're a great poet, writer, musician, but you've got to have some basic skills. Like musicians, at a point in time, there's no point in a spirit saying, "Wow, this guy's going to be the next big singer or the next big guitarist." If he doesn't play, so someone's got to, before that happens, you've got to learn the skill to be able to do it, to be able to present it or express that feeling. Um, which I think is a funny thing when you hear musicians create a great song, like How Much Longer, for example. I think, well, that wouldn't have happened if you didn't know how to play guitar. If Alex didn't know how to play guitar, that wouldn't have happened. So it's not to say, well, that's great, that just happened. These songs just happened. They didn't put people put a lot of effort into learning the instruments to get to that stage. And that's a bit that, well, why did they do that before they had the spirit? Why did they do that before they had the inspiration?
do you think that applies to Throbbing Gristle?
Yeah, and Jen spent a lot of time in experimental art groups before he went back to Hull. He was in London, Bullspond Road, in an experimental art experience group. And then he was probably naive, talentless, but he picked up a lot. He learned how to become a performer, how to shock, how to express his thoughts. When he went back to Hull and he formed Coombe, they weren't music, there was mainly art.
Mm.
And it's only out of that Throbbing Gristle were a side shoot of his art project. And that's what we'll have music, we'll have art, we'll have this. And then Throbbing Gristle became bigger. And so and he learned, he taught himself all these instruments. He's a drummer. He taught himself to play bass. So yeah, I think he was. But Malcolm was kind of ironic because he didn't learn anything. He's a useless musician, but it didn't stop him. He could find people who could do it for him.
Yeah, yeah. I think Bill Drummond touches on that quite a lot with KLF as well.
Yeah.
Obviously, Jimmy
So,
Coul's music man in that group and so on.
yeah, he's very interesting. This sort of stuff, isn't it? That he came out of Liverpool and got
Mm.
the big in Japan. Frankie Goes to Hollywood. All
Yeah,
these people, he's there. Without him, would it have happened anyway? Or because of it. And great books. We talked about he didn't know what he was doing when he formed these bands, formed these labels.
yeah.
But then he did sing at the end. He did sing. Did actually put himself on Malcolm. That's what Malcolm did as well towards the end. He put himself on the records.
Yeah, well, Malcolm McLaren's records, of course, very musically accomplished, but it's not him playing on them as such, is it? So,
Well,
yeah,
you need hands.
that old classic. Yeah, yeah. So we're sort of touching perhaps on the point here where Ripped and Torn, or perhaps not chronologically, but perhaps in spirit, the point where Ripped and Torn stops and Killy Puppy begins. But there is a kind of gap between those two things, isn't there? Where you go off to to
Yeah, France, Belgium, Holland. Yeah, and that was 1979, March 79. I remember the pub squat, because Crass had come out. I think what time, but I blame Crass for this. That this whole Pete Stennett thing and give me that, because this second last 16 written tour on 16. I then interviewed Crass. I was the first person to interview Crass on the back of this cassette. Went back to Pizza. I've got to go and speak to them, and did this. Went to Dial House, Eye Opener, and then the record can actually got released. Feeding 5000 got released, and I review it in 17, torn 17, and I can think, well, it's time to do things. I've got too complacent in my squat in London. This is not what, when I left Glasgow, I was in Glasgow thinking I'm going to go to London and do things. And even though ironically I was doing Ripton Tour and it was doing well, I kind of felt I wasn't doing enough. I felt I'd sold out. I should be, Crass saying, be the anarchist. You've got to be an anarchist again. And also at the same time that squat it was starting to fall apart, where the Frestonia was falling apart. Maybe it's just me personally, it was a sense of development. I went to a gig at the Rock Garden, saw Shrink, who I had to put on the cover of 17, something put the cover of 17. Went to see Shrink at the Rock Garden, very glam rock. Also back to my roots, very glammy sort of band. And at the gig, someone said, "Oh, come back to my house. I'm going to have a party at my house," which is around the corner from the Rock Garden on James Street, just opposite the tube station. James Street and Longacre, there's a kind of corner. And
where sounds would later be, of
the
course.
sounds were across the road.
Right.
Across the road. So you went into this place, and you went in through one door, and it was all interlinked. All these houses on James Street and Longacre were all interlinked. But you go up a flight of stairs, there's a corridor. You come down, and you're coming out another door.
Yeah.
It's a very weird place. And this is a big giant squat, unbelievable giant squat. And there was no party. This person took me there on false pretenses. There was no party there, but within a week, I was there with my bags. I moved in with them, and that was me breaking away really from Ripton Torn, from the Sandy, the Jen, Alex, Skid Kid, even thinking I've got to get away from all this. It's hit its course, run its course. So I moved to this other squat. I thought, this is it. This is the new beginnings. And in that squat, I first came across the occult. This was my next big jump. Though Sandy and Alex were big into Crowley, and they had lots of Crowley books and Kabbalah. I used to sit taking speed and sitting up all night reading the Crowley books and Dion Fortune and stuff. But then suddenly here, this squat, James Street, Longacre, it's almost like that's becoming reality. It was gone from a theory to practice. That suddenly, even though it was Shrink, completely you wouldn't think he was related to Crowley and all this stuff, but suddenly he was the gateway into this squat. Because it wasn't just a squat. There was people in there who were very, very into their magic. And from them, I met other people up near the British Museum, more squats up near the British Museum, who are even more into their magic, And it was kind of gone ironically, because Genesis coming around to the squat at Bramley Road, he never really talked about Crowley or magic. Though there's the occult bookshop, Atlantis Bookshop on Museum Street,
Of course.
which I discovered through moving to Covent Garden. And I used to see Genesis in there. I'd start going there. I remember seeing Genesis in there once, like a real dislocation from my Latimer Road, which seemed like decades away, a lifetime away. And so there was Genesis in Atlantis, and he was speaking to the guy behind the counter very knowledgeably about Crowley, some arcane, intricate fact. They were talking about some book or some artifact, and wow, this is a mind blower. But so that was the kind of jump there. I think so. It's jumping out of the punk, if you like, the music. Suddenly, this magic had kind of taken hold, or beginning to take hold there. There's also the AUM, Anarchist United Mystics used to have a gig there in one of the basements of this big block. And they became very, I don't know if you look them up, they're very influential. I think Crass actually played this basement as well. I've seen a copy of IT. IT was run, one issue was edited from that block as well. And in the IT, there's a little gig review and of the AUM night. And in there, there's the one that says Cars, CRAS. And it's either the Cars or Crass.
Yeah,
Misspelled.
so
So how all these things come to this thing, how these things all come together. I remember one of the AUM nights used to go down there, and this girl, one of the girls from the squat above, she did a song, and there's a guy played guitar. The band called Bitch were there. The guitarist from Bitch went on stage and played this just one note, very velvety, this sort of one note drone, and this girl sang "I'm a Believer." The Monkees intoned it. I think I had a mystical revelation at that. It gives me chills to think about it. That these are people from above, and they're playing in this basement, and I knew these people, and this is like just transcendental. It sounds like nothing, but it's like droning guitar, and I'm a believer. Just talked, no highs or lows, and it just spoke it all the way through in monotone. Been such
Nico type sort of
such yeah, but that sort of passion, without expressing the passion. I remember that stays in my mind. That because also there, I remember one time in that building, I went in one afternoon. There's a guy I'd never seen before, this old black guy, and he was sitting there, and he had a copy of Cosmic Trigger, Robert Anton Wilson's Cosmic Trigger.
Okay.
Which I'd never heard of before. This is open. I think he gave it to me. He was talking about Cosmic Trigger and Robert Wilson, which is links into the Crowley, the 23s, and everything. And he gave me that card. I still got the book. I never saw the guy again. Never saw him again. And that book was one of the original first pressings of that book.
That
I don't
book
know
is
how it's even.
responsible for my podcast being Zen23, incidentally.
So you know what I'm talking about then, the Robin. So things like that you can see how things were happening there that was different from ATV. There's Mark Perry, Sandy Robertson, Alex Ferguson. And I tried gone there almost to get away, almost my creative retirement. Maybe I think there's too much happening in that house. So I had to go somewhere and just relax. And I got hit with this whole wave of, as I relaxed, as I opened away from what I was into, this whole new wave of occultism kind of swamped over me. And then in that squat, Bob Short of Blood and Roses, he moved in. Dave of Sex Gang Children moved in, and Brett, who helped do Kill Your Pet Puppy, moved in. All blame me for that.
Yeah.
I met these people at gigs, and they said, "I'll come back. I'm going to stay." So all of them. So it almost like created a new group, this creative hub. And then we got evicted. Suddenly there's eviction notices on all around all the doors. There's all being evicted. And people, some of the more together hippies had gone to find a fire station in Old Street. So we're going for this building, basically. This James Street, Longacre, was made a fruit and veg warehouse. And all the ground floors are all old shops. And so above the foot, how these all interlinked, because they're all administrative offices or warehouses or storage places. So the whole thing was just one big giant warehouse. And these people moved from there to this fire station. And though we weren't welcome, it's like, so we're moving here, we're forming a cooperative and everything, we're going to make it together. The hippie kind of thing. Malcolm would have loved all this stuff. Never trust a hippie, never trust a punk. So they went off over there, and we didn't go. But I did take my stuff there. I did take a lot of stuff over there, and stored it. And then that was when we went to Europe. I thought, well, we're being evicted. We opened a squat. We tried to open a squat. We opened two squats actually near the British Library and British Museum. It was the same place at that time, wasn't it? this is what you did in the Covent Garden. It's still run down. You know, London was derelict, and
Yeah.
even these old posh buildings around that area were empty. If you could get into them, you were in.
It's
And
insane to think about that now, isn't it? Where there isn't
yeah,
a square inch that hasn't been exploited in some
well,
kind.
you look at the James Lane Longacre corner now, and it's like, you know, it's gone on what it should have been then. You know, it should have been exploited then. The Second World War was it's still remnants. You know, the
Yeah,
devastation of the Second World War was still there.
yeah, it was bomb sites, wasn't there?
But there were bomb sites. There's a lot of corrugated iron, but when it wasn't the stuff inside, people had left London, never come back because of the war. But I remember this one place we went into and had this beautiful painted ceiling. We all went in from the squat, and we got in. And I remember this one. We found a door. This building is very near. It wasn't right opposite the library. There's another opposite the museum. A couple of streets back. Actually, it's near New Oxford Street. Because I remember this. I go past it sometimes. You go the building we broke into was phenomenal. It looked nothing from the outside, just a few posh looking place. But you got in, and one room had a ceiling, great big painted ceiling of like a proper painting, a big mural on the ceiling, and all paneled walls and everything. And then we're walking around this building. I'll have this bedroom. I'll have that. I'll have that room. And then there's a door, and we found this door right at the back. We managed to get it open, and it opened onto a ballroom. In
That's
this door,
mad.
and there's a whole ballroom, and at the other end of the ballroom there's another door, and it went into a shop on New Oxford Street. And that was the downfall. That shop was like a jeweler's. So I found jewelers, and some guy took some not expensive jewelry, costume jewelry, took some things out of that shop as he shut the door and went back to the boys. We're never going to open this door again. Yeah. So it's too big. It's my bedroom. I'm going to have this one. Then we all went and stayed in the room with the painted ceiling. We all stayed there that night because in those days, if you stay at night, you then technically own it. You can put your sign on the wall. You know, we know we're squatting this building. And the police came the next morning and said, "You better get out." You know, said, "Forget your sign, mate. Get out now." You know, this is like, you know, some sort of like military place or something, some place that public weren't meant to be in. They didn't care about the law.
Right.
They'd have taken us away. So we all went out. We all buggered off. So, well, look at the sign, eviction. You know, squatters' rights, squatters' handbook. Fuck off. Then they came round. They came round to the squat to Longacre, and they went specifically for this guy. They knew how they knew. They got this guy, and they went into his room. They found his bits of jewelry. Then they arrested him. So someone somehow, it's just scary how much these people, you know, who are these people? The anti-spirits, you know, they knew who he was, and they even found a library book. He went to all this stuff and found an overdue library book that was added to his
It's
arrest
just
charge.
crimes.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
So
that was but there's more to come with this one. Because we're still living in the squat. Most people moved to the fire station. Then
yeah,
Brett, Bob, me, Dave, we thought, no, we're going to do this again. The four of us going to do this. Not there's too many people went to that house. It's too obvious. So we went to another place. We found it up a courtyard opposite British Library, British Museum. In a courtyard, there's a flight staircase and a door. Behind that door, there was empty. So we're going in there. We're going to have that one. And so we went in one night. Went in, broke a little window, got in, and again, that was the whole street, the whole row of the street was all interlinked. This is bigger. There's lifts. we thought it was just like one small little house. And it's all interlinked, and there's lifts going up and down as well. Where's it going to go? We're not getting that. Not going to experiment. And we're in there. I mean, this is ridiculous. This is bigger than anything. And same thing next morning. These police came around, kicked in the door, right out. Well, they actually took us to the police station. There's no eviction, squatters' rights. They actually took us to the police station, where they're very heavy, very, very heavy on us. Didn't actually hurt us, but they threatened violence. And they basically said, it actually took us to court. We actually went to all actually arrested for breaking and entering. Went to court, and then we had some sort of fine. We had a fine, and I thought, this is enough. This is 79. It was 1979, and Thatcher just come in. So this is all, these type of police were really loving it. This heavy draconian sort of stuff. So they came out that police, the court. I practically went to France that day. So that day or the next day, and I took whatever stuff I had left to the fire station, or even moved to the fire station there. Again, the hippies got it right. They got to the fire station, was all fine. Our 2 attempts at getting to these places were just ridiculous, and we opened up cans of worms. And so I went to France. I thought, well, I've got nothing here, nothing in London. Why not have nothing in Paris?
Yeah,
see
right.
See what it's like there. See what punk is like over there. And because I stopped doing Ripped and Torn, and I think all this is going on. I'd stopped Ripped and Torn from the pub squat for Festonia. That's 17, issue 17. I was thinking of doing. I did have an issue 18 laid out, but never got any further than that. I think I took the laid out sheets to the fire station, and that's as far as it got. Never got printed. Anyway, so that was so I went to Paris, Brussels, Amsterdam. I don't know how much of this I could speak for hours about that as well.
Where were you staying in these places?
In Paris, well, first of all, the 4 of us went together. Dave, Bob, no, Dave from 3 of us. Brett, Dave, and me went. Bob didn't go. We got a hotel. Got a hotel in what's it called? Saint-Germain-des-Prés, call it down there. Then after about a week, we couldn't afford the hotel room, or a week or a few days. Those 2 went back to London, and I left the hotel, and I started doing a bit like when I went to London on the overnight buses. I'd walk the streets at night. I'd sit on the metro, go on forever on the metro, and there's all-night cinemas. There's these all-night cinemas you can go into. And I go and sit in these all-night cinemas. And one of these cinemas, and also I used to hang out with all the punks. I found out where the punks used to hang out, by the centre of the Pompidou. And there's the punks, and there's some rockers who are supposed to be animosity between modern punks and rockers, but there wasn't really, not in Paris. There was a little bit with the suburban rockers, but a lot of the rockers who lived in central Paris loved punks. And all used to get on each other. Remember all the stuff that spooked me was handshaking. These punks are raggedy old punks and rockers and all sorts. Shake everyone's hand, even if it's like 20 people sitting on a bench. You'd shake everyone's, turn up, shake their hand, and when you leave, you have to shake their hands and kiss the girls. What the fuck is this? What the fuck is going on? But then I loved it. This is fantastic. And in one of these cinemas, these rockers that I knew from the Pompidou were in there as well. And this came and spoke to me, and grasped the fact that they're saying you can squat our building. And I went back to, they were squatting in an apartment block, and they said, there's a place here, there's a door here. And there's a tiny little room, a little studio flat, and they said, habitez-vous. And so that was it. So I stayed there. And then in Brussels, I knew somebody from Festonia, a girl from Festonia had gone back to Brussels. She was Belgian. And she said, if you ever go to Brussels, look me up. Big mistake. And
What
then
were you looking for in these places?
Sorry?
What were you looking for in these places?
I think that's the question I was asking myself. Like, what was I? Yeah, what was I doing? What am I doing? What's doing with my life? Trying to find some new direction. I think it was interesting to see how punk was being understood in other places. Maybe I thought, London would had the Crash thing, we'd had the Pistols. And I was trying to see how did people what was people's take on punk abroad. And there's also a lot of people coming into London from abroad in '78, especially. They were moving in because of the punk scene, and I was interested, oh, where do you come from? I was speaking to people, where do you come from? And then, I thought, oh, wow, to reverse the trend, let's go to where they come from and see what it's really like over there. And so I'd stopped the Ripton tour, and maybe it was a big writer's block, who knows? But just trying to find inspiration. But I just find one of the interesting things was in France, Sid Vicious was huge, absolutely huge. They really understood the punks there, and even the rockers. Everyone understood the imagery, the spiky hair, the swastika t-shirt, leather jacket, tight trousers, bang on, absolutely bang on for Paris. They didn't understand the words too much of anything. In Belgium, it was more Blondie. Blondie was huge. Then in Amsterdam, Crass. I couldn't believe it. Crass were monstrous. It was a graffiti central, Amsterdam, and most of that graffiti was Crass. And they used to do these ornate graffiti with like Gothic writing in it, masses of it all everywhere. And they really got, because they understood English. They could speak the language, and so they understood the meaning of the lyrics. And so I'd gone from Sid Vicious to Blondie, and suddenly, bang! These people are up to date, or am I out of date? Are we all out of date over here? And then I sort of stayed in squats in Amsterdam, ran into people at a gig, or some gig somewhere, or just some pub. They know, so stay with, come and stay in our place. I guess it's amazing that these places are so big that there's spaces everywhere. And then from Amsterdam, went back to Paris, and so at this point I'd got a French girlfriend as well, which, in Paris. So she came with me to Belgium and to Amsterdam. Then we went back to Paris, and then I left. I went back to London. I'm not sure if I was going to go back or it's over. I'm not sure what the situation, but now I went back to the fire station. I think I say what was I looking for? I don't know whether I found it or not. But I think I was interested in the Sid Vicious and Crass thing. Really filled me up. That's great. My curiosity was fulfilled. This is what it's like abroad, and this is what it's like abroad. I've done it. I went to the fire station. So I had nowhere else to go. I came back to London from Paris, sort of about £1 in my pocket. Like, where am I going to go? So the only place I know of is the fire station, and maybe the hippies will let me in. So I went back into the fire station, knocked on the door, and this girl opened the door. She had a fishnet sort of top on, nothing underneath it, big blonde spiky hair. And she opened the door and she said, "Oh, you're Tony. Who the fuck are you? Who the fuck are you? What are you doing here? And why do you know my name?" So that's a Crowleyan moment there. I think you're in the right place at the right time.
I think we're going to have to split this into more than one part, Tony.
Oh, yeah. See, I said to you I didn't have much to say.
So I'll tell you what, let's just pause this and we can have a chat. But
Yeah,
I'll say this is end of part one because that seems like a good sort of point there.
I think it's a huge good point. Yeah, and then it really started.
Well,
then it got interesting.
That's the introduction over. Okay, so for the sake of this
stop recording now, yeah?
I will do any second. I'll just say for the sake of this part, thank you very much, Tony Drayton, also known as Tony D.
Thank you very much, Gerard.